Welcome to the Neuro Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Joseph Coppus, and I am here with my guest today, Mimi Hayes. Thank you for joining me, Mimi.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Is it as cold out there in New York as it is here in Chicago?
No, it's still like 50s. It's
What?
still, yeah, I know.
It's
I'm worried. I don't know what's going on.
Well, it is November 8th, and it is literally half of that here. So I'm not, it is what it is. But so, Mimi, you have a pretty interesting story, and then you've taken that story, and then you've found creative ways to express that and relate that to other people who have suffered TBIs, correct? And then you've written a book. So I'm really excited to hear more about the book and your comedy and how you have expressed what happened to you, basically, and how you're reaching other people in that same situation. So can you kind of give us a rundown of maybe how this all got started?
Yeah, so I'm from Aurora, Colorado, and I was becoming a high school teacher, which is something that I wanted to do my whole life. And so I went to school for that, graduated. I had just started my student teaching semester at a school in Denver. I was 5 days in, and as you can imagine, it's a very hectic place to be in a public school the very first week of school. And I started kind of having these symptoms that I just kind of wrote them off as like, oh, this is just what it's like to be a teacher. Like, I'm really tired. I'm a little dizzy. I'm a little clumsy. My vision was kind of getting weird. So I just kind of was just thinking that was normal for the career that I had chosen. And then it got really bad. I ended up in the ER, and I couldn't move my head without like throwing up. And it was just very, very alarming. So we went into the ER. They said, oh, like it's an ear infection or it's vertigo, or, I got several different misdiagnoses in this process, until the following day, my mom said, you know what, we're going to go into the ER again. We're not going to leave until they figure out what's going on because you're not getting better. This is not normal for you. And so we basically didn't leave until they gave us an MRI, and we had to fight for that too. So when they did the neuro test, and I'm sure you've done this before, you put the finger in front of the face, and the nurse said, oh, do you see double? And I said, no. And then my mom said, you're doing it wrong. You need to move the finger. So she literally stepped in front of the nurse, neuro test herself. Mm-hmm. She's not. But then you could see my eyes were like twisting, and they were having trouble tracking, which is a very clear like neuro problem.
Absolutely.
So we got the MRI. They found a cavernous angioma, which is a little clump of cells that had probably been in my cerebellum my whole life. We just didn't know. And then my theory is stress caused it to hemorrhage, from being a teacher. I was also on a blind date when I had a headache. Mm-hmm. So I do think that was the pinpointed time of when it may have started. So, if that says anything about the dating world.
So I take it went well.
Yeah, you did not get a second date. But so all this was happening, and then they found out what it was, and they said, you need to go home and go on bed rest because we don't want to do a surgery right now. We don't think it would be effective to go through all of that tissue, which I'm like, oh my God, this is so scary. So I went home, and they just said it might go away on its own. So I stopped teaching. I stopped going on dates. I was watching a lot of Netflix, just wearing my sweatpants. And over the course of about 3 weeks, I had lost mobility in half of my body. And I was seeing double full time. And all the while I'm thinking this is weird and I don't understand it. And I'm kind of making really dark jokes about it. And I'm like, yeah, it's fine. Let's go on a walk. Let's drag half of my body down the street. I was really like just making dark stuff out of this.
Hmm.
And when I lost my taste buds, they were like, my parents were like, okay, you need to stop joking around. We need to call the surgeon again. And we did a second MRI. Sure enough, it had gotten bigger. And they were like, all right, go time, having surgery on Friday. It was a Tuesday. And I was like, okay, I'm having brain surgery.
Hmm.
Totally. I was 22 years old, by the way.
Okay.
uh, so all my friends were like getting married and like going to grad school. And I'm like, I'm going to have brain surgery. Isn't that fun? Isn't that the same thing as what you're doing as an adult?
Big life event.
Yeah, it's a big life event, but
Hmm.
I really didn't know anyone else who was having that. So, did the brain surgery, and it was a smashing success. However,
Good.
I came out of surgery with my vision was still double, but also sideways.
Mm.
So that was weird.
Okay.
And basically it had swelled different areas of my brain that were controlling my vision. Some of my short-term memory, ability to remember deadlines and things that I need to do was impacted. So I got to go to rehab, an intensive rehab center, and relearned how to walk again. They fixed my vision with like a piece of tape on my glasses,
Okay.
to my seeing singular again, which I think was so DIY and so fascinating.
It works.
Yeah, it worked. And then I left the hospital. Within 2 weeks, I spent a few more months doing outpatient therapy. And then I was back in the classroom within a few months of brain surgery, teaching those same kids I was teaching for those first 5 days.
Okay.
So I was just like,
Awesome.
oh, didn't even skip a beat. Like basically
Yeah.
just went back into what I was doing. And all the while I was writing this book about what I was going through, which 4 years later, I was able to publish. So
Congratulations.
yeah, that's thank you. That's the short, long version of it. But I'm sure there's a lot of stuff I skipped along the way.
Yeah, so, well, first, right off the bat, can you tell our listeners what the title of the book is?
Mm-hmm. It's called I'll Be Okay. It's Just a Hole in My Head.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a memoir, and it's also available on Audible as an audiobook. It's not my voice, but the actress who read it is very, very great, and I feel like she got my sense of humor very well. So the book is out. It's available. It's in bookstores. It's on Amazon. If you are in New York, I will sell you one myself and sign a copy for you.
Awesome.
Yeah, so it's out now.
Awesome. Yeah. I can't wait to read it or listen to it. And so, okay, so you've been teaching, or you went back to teaching. Were you experiencing any issues with teaching after this was all, sort of resolved, or once you went through the rehab process, or what are you dealing with now still?
Yeah, so I found teaching to be extra hard, having brain injury. A lot of stuff that was also impacted was like my hearing. I could like hear everything, so I really couldn't filter out a lot of sounds. So the classroom was a very loud place for me because they were high schoolers, so they're 16 and always, taking Snapchats and listening to music and, just very loud, which exhausted me. So I ended up teaching for 2 years in Colorado. And about beginning of my second full year with my own classroom, I was like, I don't know if I can do this anymore. This is very hard for anybody. And now you're going to, brain injury. And my kids all knew about it, and they understood. I mean, they still pushed because they were still teenagers, but it was hard. So I decided I didn't want to do that anymore. And I moved to the loudest, biggest world instead.
Yeah, Aurora, Colorado sounds so pleasant compared to New York.
very suburban, quiet.
Hmm.
Uh, but I had been doing stand-up comedy
Hmm.
after I recovered in like 2015, I started doing stand-up, and a lot of it was about my brain injury, and it really wasn't that funny. And I had this thing to say. I had something to say about
Hmm.
how I thought it was weird and how I didn't understand it, and how you have to learn how to use a wheelchair when you're 22, and you're like, what? Um, so I was doing stand up and writing the book, and then teaching, basically took a lot of my time, but I was still kind of moonlighting as this like comic writing person in the evenings.
Hmm.
And when I got to that point where I was like, maybe teaching isn't good for me anymore, or never, maybe it never was, because 5 days in, my head exploded. Maybe that should have been a clear sign that
Yeah,
this was not
that's a good sign.
a good sign. But I wanted to publish the book. I wanted to do stand up more.
Hmm.
Um, New York was always a place that I had romanticized about. So I took a chance and moved to New York City.
Awesome. And so you said you do stand up now, and it's all based on the head injury and the what you went through,
Yeah,
or
more or
the.
less. I mean, I kind of steered away from that content for a few years because it
Hmm.
was so vulnerable and so hard. And truth is, it's not like the thing is that subject matter is not funny. I'm the one who's funny. So learning that distinction and how to play with that with the audience has always been a struggle.
Yeah.
Um, Most of my stand-up is about my brain injury, what it's like to be a young person. When I moved to New York, I did a lot of like, I'm new to New York jokes, and those kind of get old after a while. So then you like stop doing that.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah.
Okay. Have you been able to reach other people who have been in your shoes that have really resonated with the jokes you tell on stage, that have
Yeah.
maybe come up to you and just said, your jokes really helped me out because I'm dealing with similar things?
Yeah. And that surprised me because, when I wrote the book, I was kind of like, I'm a little afraid that people that are brain injured are going to be upset with
Hmm.
me. Very able-bodied now. I'm very, functioning. You wouldn't know this about me. I would never file for any disability, and so I was a little afraid that people would be like, you don't represent us.
Hmm.
That's, but actually I found that they're my best advocates and best crowd. And so when I started touring the book and I was doing like public speaking,
Hmm.
I was doing talks that were like funny TED Talks, to brain injured communities and survivor networks and rehab groups.
Hmm.
And they love it. They're like, oh my God. Like, and so one person came up to me and he said, my family doesn't get my sense of humor, but you do. And, and he told me like a really dark joke about, because he was hit by a car,
Yeah.
and like he told me his like joke and his punchline, and I was like laughing, and I was like, that's dark and funny, and I'm into it.
Yeah.
So I think if anyone's able, really, it's for me to be able to share it, and if someone relates to that, I'm like, oh, that's awesome. I think it's good to find humor in things that are traumatic, because otherwise then it's just traumatic. And so,
Absolutely. Yeah, because these things can be really tough for people, and it seems like humor tends to be one of the best ways to deal with things and accept things, and to just be okay with the situation,
mhm.
and hopefully get through it, and make it that much easier for the person. Yeah.
And I think like families and friends sometimes don't understand why the person going through it is coping that way,
Hmm.
which can lead to a lot of like awkward, like, that's not funny, and stop telling that joke, and like, that's hurtful, and like things like that. But I think that um, everyone copes with things differently, and some people are, there are probably some survivors out there that are like, I can't believe she's doing that.
Hmm.
That's unheard of, and she shouldn't be doing it. And that's they're allowed to have those feelings.
Hmm.
So everyone's going to cope in a different way, and you know, people might not be ready to see the humor in their experience yet.
Hmm.
I was going through things so quickly that the only way I could understand it was cause I didn't want to understand the truth of it, right? The reality was I was having brain surgery, couldn't walk, I couldn't see, and I just didn't want to, I just kind of refused to believe that. So I just kind of went into my little like funny land and just kind of used that as a way to get through it, because it was, terrifying.
Yeah, absolutely. And if people wanted to come out to your show or to watch some of your material, what are some ways that they'd be available to the public?
Oh, well, most of my comedy is on my YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
Google Mimi Hayes. My website, I have a blog where I put just funny rantings I have that didn't make it into the book. Mm-hmm. I have a podcast as well.
Okay.
Where I interview neurologists and brain scientists about the brain, and I kind of ask them questions about my brain, if they know about certain symptoms I had, because, why not get some free medical advice?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And so that's called Mimi and the Brain, and that's available on any streaming device you could think of. If you live in New York City, come and find me. I usually do shows in Manhattan and Brooklyn. But I also am traveling a lot. So if there are people out there that want me to come, to them, I love, and I came and saw you guys,
mm-hmm.
facilities. I like being in the brain community and showing what I have to display, basically. So yeah, it's been really fun.
Absolutely. So across the different mediums that you express yourself, what are some of the I guess the words of hope and maybe encouragement that you often provide your listeners and viewers? So what?
Yeah. I think recovery and the trauma that comes with injuries, especially brain injuries, can be very isolating. And that for me, I found that being vulnerable, it sounds counterintuitive, but being vulnerable and actually sharing pictures of me during my, brain surgery and saying, hey, I'm still coping with this. I'm still anxious. I still, have to wear noise canceling headphones all the time. Being really open and honest about that will actually attract people to you, mm-hmm. which could counter the isolation that you feel.
Yeah.
So I know it's so scary, and some people are like, no, I'm just going to be in my little private scary cave. Mm-hmm. But once you start coming out of the cave and saying, hey, this is hard, this is what I'm doing, I don't have it all figured out, people will attract to you. Some of my best friends now live in different parts of the world, and they found me on Instagram because I posted pictures every day during Brain Injury Awareness Month. Mm-hmm. And I still do this every March. And every day I post a new picture that's either from my injury, that's oh, here's a video of me in rehab, or here's me today, wearing my headphones, being wow, why do I live in New York City? That was a dumb idea. So loud here. And I found a lot of survivors that way who want to connect and who want to share their stories, and they want to hear other people's stories. So my biggest thing is just, be vulnerable if you can. Social media is a nice way to do it. If you have support groups, I didn't really even look for those when I was coming up through my recovery, because I was teaching. So I literally just threw myself back into work, and I think I really could have benefited from a support group or therapy. Mm-hmm. Really, I got a lot of therapy for my body, but I didn't get enough therapy for my emotions, my mind, yeah. What it felt like to be totally overwhelmed in a job that I had chosen, and really wanted to do. Talking to some other teachers was fine, but also they weren't teachers with brain injuries. It's a different experience. So to really find a tribe, I think, is the most important, regardless if you're going to be doing comedy or, public speaking. That's a lot. It really is for everybody. But I think the tribe piece, finding your community, is the best thing that you can do for yourself if you're dealing with something, and reach out to me. Like I love hearing from people, and always down to like share how you can turn things around, be positive when it feels like you can't be positive. I love talking to people like that.
Absolutely. Find your tribe. I love that. And you said you didn't maybe get enough external help for your mind and your emotions during the recovery process, but it definitely sounds like you found ways, I mean, through your comedy, through your writing, through the Instagram, to kind of express yourself, and maybe that was a bit of that, mental, emotional therapy that, you kind of gave to yourself. Did you have any maybe other influences or other comedians or bloggers that kind of spoke to you where you were at that time, that kind of influenced you to where you are now?
I've always loved Maria Bamford, who is off the wall. I mean, she is very eclectic, and she's battled with depression and anxiety her whole life. She's always been someone that I'm like, oh, she just does it. Like, she just says what she wants to say, and she doesn't care about how it comes across. And that's what makes her so funny. I've also been a huge fan of Amy Poehler, and Tina Fey, and recently Phoebe Waller-Bridge, who does Fleabag. And that was a one-woman show that she has now made into the TV series on Amazon Prime. And that deals with a lot of like trauma and comedy, and they do kind of fit together in a weird way. And I like comedians who are playing with that. And also Nanette Hannah Gadsby, that was just recently when I came across her, when she kind of went viral. But her whole discussion about I don't want to just make people laugh anymore, I have something to say, is kind of, I really related to that, because also part of my comedy is like saying like, this can happen, and it happens all the time to young people, and we don't talk about it enough. And if you think that someone you love, or not to scare anybody, but it's not going to happen, think again, because it's happening more and more. So the more that I can advocate for young people that are going through that through my comedy, that's what I want to do. So I'm seeing a lot of comedians kind of go to their darker sides. And that's really fun to watch, that the nature of comedy is changing. Maybe that I could fit more within it, because of the message that I'm telling, as opposed to just like, oh, it's just gotta get laugh, like X amount of laughs per minute. Like I don't care as much about that as I do about having a really important message to say. Yeah.
I think one thing I've noticed, because I mean, I love, as a consumer of comedy, I love stand-up comedy. And something I think I've noticed is that it's such a good platform to express ideas that were maybe ideas and stories that we're afraid to share otherwise, whether it be social commentary or, a traumatic story that happened to you. The comedy seems to be one of the best ways to express those things. And
yeah, it's really interesting. And I think people can use it for good, and people can use it for bad. And, when you have people listening to you and you have a microphone, you have a responsibility that I think some take lightly, and that people are listening, and you basically can say whatever. But you're right in that we bring a lot of like social, political topics to the table, and we use comedy to kind of like, actually, let's talk about this. Actually, let's get past the fighting part and just say what we feel. Yeah. So that can be good and bad, I feel. But my thing about comedy is I never want to hurt anybody. Like I'm not about like pointing anything at anyone, or doing the crowd work where you're like making fun of people. Like that's just not me. I just don't ever comfortable doing that. I would rather point it back at me and laugh at myself about all the funny things I do, um, and things like that that are related to my injury.
Mm-hmm.
It took me 20 minutes to find this pair of glasses today. Don't know why, just forgot where I put them, and that happens, frequently. Stuff that is relatable to many people, but also specifically people that are like, oh yeah, it's really hard to remember things now that you've had that experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, it's much more, I think, approachable for people to laugh with you than you laughing at someone, obviously. So yeah. So I think that's a much better approach. So, but Mimi, we are just about out of time. So I wanted to make sure that I gave you enough space to, again, talk or leave us with any, final words of wisdom or hope for anyone in a similar situation. And then lastly, again, how we can find out more about you and the things that you're producing today.
Yeah. Call me if you need me, people. Reach out to people when you're struggling. It doesn't help you to, sit with your feelings. So always reach out. There's a lot of people that are making this community a really cool place to be. One of those people is Joe from the Neuro Nerds. That's his podcast, Joe Borges. He is a great advocate for connecting people. So he actually, part of what he does is he's connecting people in different cities. So he literally reaches out to about 15 different survivors a day. And he says, hey, where do you live? What are you going through? Oh, you want to meet someone in a coffee shop? Okay, cool. Let me see. Let me find somebody. And he's literally doing that as like his mission, and I support him fully. So it's things like that really you may have no idea that they exist. Those people are out there. But he's a great advocate, and we're working together on a lot of things to try to help the community. So reach out. Make some laughs if you can. Try to find the humor in losing your glasses and ripping your entire apartment apart trying to find them. We only get this one life, basically. We only get this, and this is your life now. It's, if you want to say, the new normal, but I don't think normal is even a thing. So this is just your life now, and it's okay to mourn the life you may have lived before. Sometimes I do, because it was more stable and I had more money. But I've chosen this path now, and it kind of chose me as well. And I'm grateful for that. And you can find me anywhere. Mimi Hayes Brain is my Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. And you can find my book, I'll Be Okay, It's Just a Hole in My Head. And what else? My podcast, Mimi and the Brain. And hit me up. And yeah, basically any medium, I am on it. So you can find me.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much again, Mimi, for coming on today. I really enjoyed talking with you, and I hope our listeners are going to go check out your stand-up and your book and your podcast, because there's a lot of great stuff on there. So yeah, I think they'll all appreciate it a lot. So
well, thank you so much.
Yeah. So, this has been your host from the Neuro Wellness Podcast, Dr. Coppus. Be well.